You have everything you need. Food that never runs out, water on tap, no predators, no cold, no disease worth fearing. A roof, a bed, a safe place to sleep every single night. By every measure your ancestors would have understood, you are living in paradise. So why do so many people inside that paradise feel like something is quietly going wrong? The real answer is far stranger than stress, or screens, or the pace of modern life. To find it, you have to leave the human world entirely. You have to walk into a metal enclosure built in a laboratory in Maryland in 1968. And you have to meet the man who spent his life watching a perfect world destroy the creatures living inside it. His name was John B. Calhoun. Calhoun was not a doomsday prophet. He was a careful animal behavior researcher who worked for the National Institute of Mental Health. And he had a simple question. What happens to a population when every physical need is met, but space begins to run out? To answer it, he built something he called a utopia. Picture a square metal pen about the size of a small room. Inside, endless food, endless water, nesting material, comfortable little apartments stacked up the walls, reachable by ramps. The temperature stayed perfect. No cats, no hawks, no sickness sweeping through. Nothing in that pen could kill the animals inside it. Then Calhoun released 4 pairs of healthy mice into it. He called this final version of the experiment Universe 25. 25 because he had run versions of it again and again, watching the same story play out with rats and mice for years. This was the one he watched most closely. This was the one that would haunt him. At first, exactly what you would expect happened. The mice thrived. With no threats and infinite resources, they bred. The population doubled roughly every 55 days. The pen filled with the sounds of a growing, healthy colony. If you had walked in during those early months, you would have seen paradise working exactly as designed. But here's the first strange thing. The pen could physically hold more than 3,000 mice. It never came close. The population peaked at just over 2,000 and change, and then it stopped growing. Not because they ran out of food, not because they ran out of room to stand, but because something in the mice themselves began to break. To understand what broke, you have to understand a term Calhoun invented. He called it the behavioral sink. A behavioral sink is what happens when too many individuals are packed into a shared space and normal social behavior collapses in on itself. The word sink is deliberate. Think of a drain. Everything gets pulled towards the center, towards the crowd, and once it goes down, it does not come back up. Here is how it started. In a normal mouse population, a male carves out territory and defends it. He has a patch. He has a role. That role gives him a place in the world. But in Universe 25, there were too many males and not enough new territory. The young males came of age with nowhere to go and nothing to defend. So they gave up. Calhoun watched groups of these defeated males gather in the center of the pen. They stopped fighting for status. They stopped competing for mates. They stopped defending anything. They simply existed in a passive, withdrawn heap, occasionally erupting into pointless violence against each other, then sinking back into stillness. They were physically alive and socially dead. And once the males stopped playing their role, everything downstream of them fell apart. The females, who would normally be protected while raising their young, were left exposed. Nests were invaded. Mothers grew aggressive, then neglectful. They abandoned their pups. Some attacked their own young. Infant survival collapsed. In some of the nesting boxes, the death rate for the young reached almost total. Notice what is happening here. Nothing outside the mice had changed. There was still infinite food, still infinite water, still no predator, no disease, no cold. The paradise was fully intact. The collapse was coming entirely from the inside. Then came the part that unsettled Calhoun the most. A new kind of mouse appeared. He named them the beautiful ones. These were mice, mostly male, who withdrew completely from all social life. They never fought, they never courted, they never tried to mate. They did nothing but eat, sleep, and groom themselves. And because they never got into a single scrap, their coats stayed flawless. No scars, no bite marks, no torn ears. They were, physically, the most perfect-looking animals in the entire pen. They were beautiful. And they were, in every way that mattered for a species, empty. They had opted out of being mice. They performed the surface actions of a healthy life, grooming, feeding, resting, while abandoning every behavior that a mouse actually exists to do. They did not connect, they did not reproduce, they did not defend or build or seek. They just maintained themselves perfectly,
until the end. And the end came. Even though the mice were still physically capable of breeding, they had forgotten how to be a society. The last conception in Universe 25 happened around day 600. After that, not one new pup was successfully raised. The population aged, and then it simply died out. The perfect world, with every need met, went silent and empty. A utopia that ended not with starvation or war, but with a slow, total loss of the will to continue. Calhoun published his findings in 1962 in an article about population density and social pathology, and again in later work through the 60s and 70s. And when people read it, they did the obvious thing. They pointed it straight at humanity. This is the part you need to slow down for. Because for decades, Universe 25 was told as a simple horror story about overcrowding. Too many bodies in too low space equals collapse. Cities are crowded, therefore cities will collapse. It became a favorite reference for people warning about overpopulation, and it seeped into science fiction and moral panics for years. But is that actually what the experiment showed? Here's where a second researcher matters. A psychologist named Jonathan Friedman ran a series of studies on human crowding in the 1970s. He put people in densely packed rooms and measured whether density alone made them aggressive, anxious, or antisocial. And what he found complicated the whole mouse story. Crowding by itself, raw physical density, did not reliably wreck human behavior. What mattered far more was whether people felt in control, whether the situation had meaning, whether they had a role. Density was never really the villain. The villain was something subtler. Look again at what actually destroyed Universe 25. It was not that the mice were touching. It was that the young males had no territory to win, no role to fill, no meaningful place in the social order. It was that status stopped being available. The pressure that broke them was not lack of space. It was lack of purpose. A crowd of individuals with nothing to strive for and nowhere to belong. That reframes everything. Because now the question is not, are we too crowded? The question is far more uncomfortable. What happens to a creature when it no longer has to strive for anything? Calhoun himself hinted at this. He didn't think the deep problem was numbers. He thought it was what he called the death of the spirit, the first death, the collapse of the drive to engage, which arrived long before the physical death of the colony. When there was nothing left to strive for, the mice stopped striving, and once they stopped striving, they stopped being. Now hold that thought against your own paradise. You live in the safest, most resource-rich era in the history of your species. The predators are gone. The famine for many is gone. You can have food delivered without speaking to a single human. You can be endlessly entertained, endlessly comfortable, without ever leaving a soft, climate-controlled room. Every physical need Calhoun gave his mice, you have, and more. And yet look at what people describe feeling inside that comfort. A strange withdrawal, a pull towards the screen and away from the messy, difficult work of connection. A temptation to perform the surface of a life, the grooming, the curated image, the perfect coat, while quietly opting out of the harder things underneath. The beautiful ones did not look sick. That is the whole point. They looked like the winners. Now be careful here. You are not a mouse. Friedman's work is your reminder of that. A human being is not trapped in a metal pen, and human meaning does not come from defending nesting territory. You can build purpose in ways no mouse ever could, through creation, through relationships, through work that matters to you, through the deliberate choice to do hard things you were never forced to do. But that is exactly what makes the Calhoun effect a warning instead of a prophecy. The mice had no choice. They had no way to invent new meaning once the old kind ran out. You do. The collapse in Universe 25 was automatic. In your world, engagement has become optional, and anything optional can be quietly declined. So the real lesson of that silent metal pen was never about crowding at all. It was about what a living thing needs beyond survival. Not just food and safety and warmth, but friction, difficulty, something to push against, a role that matters and a reason to get up. Which brings you back to where you started. You have everything you need. And that, it turns out, was never the same thing as having everything that keeps you alive.